You have 30 minutes to clear your livestock off this property before the county takes possession. Vanessa Whitcomb said it loud enough for every person standing under that rain-soaked memorial tent to hear, and for a second, even the wind coming off the lake went quiet. My father's funeral photo sat 3 feet away on a folding table beside a coffee thermos and a tray of biscuits nobody had touched since sunrise. Cold rain tapped against the metal ranch shed behind us while 2 tow trucks idled near my front gate like they'd already won. Vanessa stood there in a cream-colored raincoat that probably cost more than my first pickup truck, one hand holding a leather folder, the other gripping a black umbrella while muddy water collected around the heels of her boots. She looked calm, too calm, like she'd rehearsed this moment in a mirror. "This isn't your land to regulate," I told her quietly. She smiled without looking at me. "Grant, your non-compliance has been documented for over a year." The board voted unanimously. Then she nodded toward the sheriff's deputy standing beside her. "We're done negotiating." The deputy looked uncomfortable from the second he stepped onto my gravel driveway. Good man. Mid-50s maybe. Rain dripping off his hat brim while he avoided eye contact with my family standing under the tent. My niece Emily was crying softly into her husband's shoulder. My grandson Luke stared at the chains hanging off the tow truck with the kind of confusion kids carry for years afterward. "Grandpa," he whispered to me, "are they taking the ranch?" That hit harder than Vanessa's paperwork ever could. The Holloway Ranch had been sitting on that stretch of Montana shoreline since 1874. My great-grandfather built the original cedar barn by hand 30 yards from the muddy water line, where fog rolled low every morning across Blackwater Lake. For generations buried on the hill behind the horse pasture. My father included now. And this woman chose the morning of his memorial to stage a public seizure attempt in front of half the county. If you've ever dealt with someone who smiles while humiliating you in public, comment below with your city and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Because people like Vanessa Whitcomb exist in every county in America. The rain got heavier after that. You could hear it rattling against the metal roofs across the property while neighbors stood near their pickup trucks pretending not to stare. Vanessa thrived on audiences. You could tell. She adjusted her gloves slowly and looked toward the gathered crowd like she was hosting a press conference instead of disrupting a funeral. "Your ranch roads violate subdivision access agreements," she announced. "The HOA has authority to enforce safety compliance." Safety compliance. That was the phrase she kept using online. In county meetings. In Facebook groups. She'd spent 8 months painting my ranch as some dangerous eyesore threatening property values for her luxury lake development up the shoreline. Funny thing was, half those homes sat on land my family used to graze cattle on before developers started carving the county into gated neighborhoods with decorative lanterns and fake rustic fences. I stepped closer to her then, enough to smell wet cedar from the soaked fence posts beside us mixed with expensive perfume and cold lake wind. "You timed this for my father's funeral?" I said. Her expression barely changed. The county schedule was outside my control. That was the first lie. I knew it immediately. Because tucked halfway out of the leather folder under her arm was a yellow routing slip from the county office downtown. Red stamped. Expedited enforcement request. Filed 48 hours earlier. Personally authorized. By Vanessa Whitcomb. The deputy never touched the chain on my gate. That mattered more than people realized. Men who work county enforcement long enough learn how to smell bad situations before paperwork catches up to them. And Deputy Earl Maddox smelled one standing in my father's pasture with rainwater running through fresh boot prints and half the neighborhood watching from under umbrellas. Vanessa noticed it too. I could see the irritation flicker across her face for half a second before the smile came back. "Deputy," she said softly, almost laughing, "we are simply securing unsafe access points pending compliance review." Earl shifted his weight in the mud and looked toward me instead. "Mr. Holloway, have you received formal notice from the county zoning office directly?" "Not the HOA. The county." Important distinction. Vanessa answered before I could. "The paperwork is in process." In process. Another careful phrase. She loved phrases that sounded official without actually saying anything. Thunder rolled somewhere across Blackwater Lake, while fog pushed low over the shoreline behind the barn. You could barely see the fishing docks through the mist anymore. I watched Earl study the yellow routing slip sticking halfway from her folder, then glance at the tow trucks idling near my driveway. One driver killed his engine. The other suddenly got very interested in his phone. Nobody wanted their company name attached to a funeral confrontation once people started recording. And people were definitely recording now. I could hear phones buzzing under the memorial tent while residents whispered to each other near the gravel parking area. Vanessa had expected fear. Instead, she was getting witnesses. "This is my father's funeral," I said. "Then perhaps you should have resolved your violations before today." Her tone stayed polished, but there was pressure underneath now. Tightness. The kind that slips out when control starts wobbling. My older cousin Wade stepped forward from beside the coffee table, rain dripping from the brim of his cattle auction cap. "Lady," he said, "you picked today on purpose." Vanessa looked at him like she was inspecting damage to furniture. "Sir, emotional accusations do not change county procedures." That sentence did not land the way she thought it would. I saw two residents near the fence exchange looks. One of them, Linda Mercer from the Lake subdivision, slowly lowered her phone with an expression people get when they realize they backed the wrong person publicly. Social pressure changes fast in small counties, especially in places where funerals still matter. Vanessa sensed it immediately and pivoted hard. "Grant," she said, lowering her voice like we were suddenly in a private conversation, "you are making this uglier than it needs to be. Sell the shoreline parcel, and this entire issue disappears." There it was. Finally. Not safety. Not compliance. The shoreline. The wet cedar strip running along the north edge of my ranch where developers had been trying to build private boat slips for 3 years. My father refused every offer before he died. So did I. The rain eased for a moment, leaving only wind off the water and the sound of tires crunching over gravel as another pickup rolled into the property. County plates. Every head turned at once. Vanessa stopped talking mid-sentence. A gray county truck came slowly down the driveway and parked beside the barn. Then out stepped Martin Greeley from the county assessor's office, carrying a leather file case under one arm and wearing the kind of expression bureaucrats get when they are very tired of somebody calling them repeatedly. He looked at the tow trucks first, then the deputy, then Vanessa. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "why am I getting 6 voicemail messages saying this ranch has already been seized?" The entire ranch went dead quiet after Martin Greeley said that. Even the rain seemed lighter for a second, just soft drops ticking against truck hoods and the metal roof over the equipment shed. Vanessa recovered first. She always did. "Martin," she said smoothly, stepping toward him with that polished neighborhood board smile back in place. "Thank you for coming out so quickly. We were simply preparing for restricted access enforcement." Martin did not return the smile. He looked exhausted. Damp courthouse files under one arm, tie half loosened, mud on his boots like he had been dragged across 3 different county problems before breakfast. "Restricted access enforcement is not property seizure," he said. "And your messages specifically used the words emergency land repossession." A few people under the memorial tent started murmuring after that. Quiet at first, then louder. I saw Linda Mercer whisper something into another resident's ear while both of them looked directly at Vanessa. The social tide was turning now, not dramatic all at once, but in small, uncomfortable shifts. People stopped standing near her. Nobody moved closer. Vanessa noticed every inch of it. "Perhaps my wording was misunderstood," she replied carefully. "There are safety liabilities involving the shoreline parcel." There it was again. The shoreline. Always the shoreline. Martin slowly looked past her toward the north end of my property where fog drifted over the lake and old cedar fencing disappeared into gray mist near the fishing dock. Then he looked back at me. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "did you authorize any transfer discussions with the Whitcomb Shores Development Board?" "No." "Any easement renegotiation?" "No." Vanessa cut in immediately. "Grant has repeatedly refused reasonable access modernization proposals that would benefit the entire community." Community. Another favorite word of hers. She used it like camouflage. What she really meant was investors. Insurance valuations. Luxury shoreline expansion. My father understood that before he died. That was why he stopped attending county dinners the last 2 years. Every handshake came attached to an offer. Every offer came attached to pressure. Thunder rolled low across the lake again while cold wind pushed through the memorial tent hard enough to rattle the folding chairs. My nephew reached over and steadied my father's framed photo before it tipped. That hit me harder than I expected. For one ugly second, exhaustion cracked through everything else. I could feel how tired I actually was. funeral paperwork, probate calls, sleepless nights listening to rain hit the barn roof while wondering how many more legal letters would show up in my mailbox by morning. Vanessa saw the weakness too. Her voice softened instantly. Manipulative people know exactly when to lower their tone. Grant, she said quietly, nobody wants this conflict. But your ranch is affecting development stability. Residents are concerned. Behind her, 3 residents visibly looked away. One actually shook his head under his umbrella. She had overplayed this badly and knew it now. Martin opened his leather file case and pulled out several documents protected in clear plastic sleeves. Funny thing about resident concern, he muttered. Most of the complaints came from the same internet address. Vanessa froze. Tiny reaction. Half a second maybe. But enough. Martin continued flipping pages while rainwater dripped from the edge of the file case onto the mud. Also, he said, the county planning office received 4 anonymous environmental hazard reports about this ranch over the last 6 months. He looked up directly at Vanessa. All filed within minutes of HOA board meetings ending. Nobody spoke after that. Not even the deputy. The only sound was wind off the lake and water running through the gravel driveway toward the shoreline ditch. Then Martin pulled one more paper from the folder and frowned at it. And there is something else, he said slowly. Somebody requested expedited review on a dormant shoreline access clause tied to this ranch. My stomach tightened immediately, because I knew exactly what that meant. My father once told me there were old agreements buried in county records that nobody had touched in decades. Agreements involving road access through our land before the subdivision ever existed. I just never realized somebody had finally gone digging for them. Vanessa's expression changed so slightly most people probably missed it, but after 30 years negotiating cattle contracts and land disputes, I noticed every flicker. The moment Martin mentioned the dormant shoreline clause, the confidence around her eyes tightened. Not panic yet. Something colder. Calculation. Rainwater dripped steadily off the edge of the memorial tent, while wind rolled across Blackwater Lake hard enough to slap small waves against the muddy shoreline below the cedar fence line. Nobody moved toward the food tables anymore. Nobody even touched the coffee. Every person standing there understood this was no longer about HOA complaints. This was land. Access. Money. Martin, Vanessa said carefully, those historical agreements are outdated and non-binding under the revised subdivision framework. Martin gave her a long look. You are not a county attorney. That landed hard. A few people near the driveway exchanged glances again. Social pressure was building in layers now. Not loud. Worse. Quiet judgment. The kind that spreads through small communities faster than gossip at a diner counter during a thunderstorm. Vanessa tried another angle immediately. Grant has refused every modernization proposal for years, she said, looking toward the residents instead of me now. Emergency vehicle access alone is a liability concern. Funny, Deputy Maddox muttered, staring toward the ranch road. Ambulances have been using that road for decades. The silence after that felt heavy enough to bend metal. Vanessa did not look at him again. Martin slowly opened the file in his hands and removed an old county map sealed inside protective plastic. The paper looked ancient. Yellowed edges. Hand markings faded almost brown with time. I recognized the shape instantly. My grandfather kept a copy hanging in his office above a rusted fly fishing reel and a photograph from 1948 showing cattle crossing the North Ridge before the lake homes existed. Martin pointed toward a narrow strip running directly through Whitcomb Shore subdivision. This easement predates every residential structure built along the west shoreline, he said. It appears Holloway Ranch retained permanent commercial and emergency access rights through this corridor. The air changed after that. You could actually feel it. Residents started looking downhill toward the paved entrance road leading into their subdivision like they were seeing it differently for the first time. Vanessa folded her arms tightly under the raincoat. That interpretation is disputed. By who? Martin asked. She hesitated. Tiny moment. But enough. Our legal team. Legal team. Another phrase meant to sound stronger than it was. I finally stepped closer to the map myself, boots sinking slightly into wet gravel while cold wind pushed rain across my jacket collar. My father had tried to explain those access agreements once during a winter storm years ago while we sat in the old Marina Diner near County Route 12. Rain hammered the windows that night too. He told me developers always smile until land rights surface. Then they panic. Back then I thought he was just bitter about outsiders buying shoreline property. Standing there now, I realized he had been warning me. Martin traced another section on the map with one finger. There is more, he said quietly. If this easement remains enforceable, portions of Whitcomb Shores may legally depend on Holloway Ranch access approvals for future roadway expansion. That one hit like thunder. Actual physical reactions around the property this time. Somebody cursed under their breath near the pickup trucks. One resident outright laughed in disbelief before covering his mouth. Vanessa's composure cracked for the first time all morning. Barely, but I saw it. Her jaw tightened and color rose into her cheeks, while rain rolled off her umbrella in uneven streams. Because suddenly the story had flipped. The ranch was not trapped inside her development. Her development might be trapped around my ranch. Vanessa ended the funeral confrontation 10 minutes later without another word to me. That was the first real sign she was scared. People like Vanessa Whitcomb never leave conversations unfinished unless they are losing control of the room. The tow trucks backed slowly down my gravel driveway through cold rain and thick shoreline fog, while residents stood watching in complete silence. Nobody waved goodbye to her. Nobody moved to defend her either. Even Deputy Maddox kept his distance as she walked back toward her white Range Rover with tight shoulders and her umbrella tilted too low to hide the tension in her face. The second her vehicle disappeared down the subdivision road, the entire atmosphere around the ranch changed. Quiet voices started immediately. You could hear it spreading through the crowd in waves. Questions, rumors, fragments of legal language nobody fully understood yet. Easements, access rights, liability exposure. Linda Mercer approached me near the barn with rainwater dripping off her sleeves and looked genuinely uncomfortable. Grant, she said softly. She told everyone the ranch roads were under county safety review. They are not. I know that now. That now mattered. More than I expected. Because for nearly a year Vanessa had controlled the narrative inside Whitcomb Shores through newsletters, emergency meetings, online neighborhood groups, and carefully staged outrage about my property. But fear shifts fast when homeowners think their million-dollar lake houses might suddenly involve hidden legal complications. By late afternoon, my phone had already started buzzing with messages from residents I had not heard from in months. Some apologetic, some nervous. One asking whether their driveway expansion permit could now be delayed because of the easement issue. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I sat alone in the old equipment shed beside the shoreline pasture after everyone left. Rain hammered softly against the metal roof, while lake wind pushed cold mist through the open doorway. My father's thermos still sat on the workbench beside a stack of branding records and feed invoices. I kept staring at it longer than I should have. Exhaustion finally settled into my bones then. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. The realization that my father had spent years quietly fighting pressures I barely understood while trying to keep this ranch alive long enough to hand it over intact. And now the entire county was circling it like hungry investors smelling blood in the water. My attorney, Daniel Pierce, arrived just before sunset in a mud-splattered Ford truck carrying 2 thick folders and a paper diner cup of black coffee. Daniel had the look all good land attorneys eventually develop in Montana. Permanent fatigue mixed with dangerous attention to detail. He listened without interrupting while rain rolled across the roof above us. When I finished explaining the shoreline clause, he leaned back slowly in the folding chair and stared out toward the fog drifting over Blackwater Lake. Grant, he said carefully, there is something you need to understand. He slid one folder across the workbench toward me. Inside were property transfer summaries tied to Whitcomb Shores development holdings, loan documents, refinance records, corporate restructuring filings. Vanessa's name appeared everywhere. Personally guaranteed, personally leveraged. She borrowed against nearly everything she owns to finance shoreline expansion phases, Daniel said quietly. If future development access gets delayed, those properties lose value fast. I looked down at the paperwork again while thunder rolled somewhere far across the water. Suddenly the obsession made sense. The fake safety complaints, the emergency enforcement pressure, the public humiliation at my father's funeral. Vanessa was not trying to improve the community. She was trying to save herself. Then Daniel pointed toward one line buried deep inside the financing documents and frowned. And unless I am reading this wrong, he said. Her own house may already be carrying distressed debt exposure. The storm finally broke around 2 in the morning. I sat alone at the ranch kitchen table listening to rain hammer against the old metal roof while Daniel spread documents across the surface under a yellow hanging light that buzzed softly every few seconds. The whole house smelled like wet cedar, black coffee, and old paper. Outside, fog rolled thick over Blackwater Lake until the shoreline lights from Whitcomb Shores looked blurred and distant through the windows. Daniel tapped one fingernail against a refinancing statement with Vanessa's signature buried near the bottom. She leveraged future shoreline expansion projections to secure additional lending, he said. If access rights become unstable, lenders start asking questions. For the first time since my father died, I stopped thinking like a man under attack and started thinking like a landowner again. Quietly, carefully. My father used to say panic is expensive in property disputes. The people who stay calm keep the land. I looked down at the stack of records in front of me while thunder rolled low across the lake. What happens if those lenders discover she initiated enforcement actions while concealing disputed access rights? Daniel leaned back slightly in the chair. Insurance carriers hate undisclosed liability exposure, especially when public records and homeowner complaints start connecting together. That sentence stayed with me the rest of the night. By sunrise, the emotional fog I had been trapped inside for months finally started clearing. Grief was still there. Exhaustion too. But underneath it now sat something steadier. Direction. I spent the next 3 days rebuilding the timeline Vanessa thought nobody would ever assemble. Not just complaints. Coordination. I pulled archived HOA newsletters from residents who quietly slipped them into my mailbox after word spread about the easement dispute. I collected screenshots from neighborhood forums where Vanessa repeatedly described my ranch as pending regulatory correction. Daniel obtained records showing emergency access concerns had never once appeared in official county recommendations before Whitcomb Shores refinancing negotiations intensified 18 months earlier. The deeper we looked, the uglier it became. Every pressure campaign against my ranch lined up almost perfectly with financing deadlines tied to shoreline development phases. Meanwhile, social pressure inside the subdivision started turning poisonous for Vanessa. Residents who once repeated her talking points suddenly avoided her at the Marina Diner near Route 12. One homeowner publicly questioned HOA leadership during a budget workshop after discovering legal defense reserves had quietly doubled over the last year. Another demanded copies of liability disclosures tied to shoreline access disputes. Vanessa responded the only way people like her ever do when control slips. More pressure, more performance, more carefully polished intimidation. On Thursday afternoon, she appeared at the county permit office demanding immediate review of my agricultural road certifications. 2 residents witnessed her arguing loudly enough that staff closed the lobby doors early. By Friday morning, screenshots of the confrontation were circulating through local Facebook groups with captions asking why the HOA president seemed desperate about one ranch road. Desperate. That word spread fast. Daniel and I drove into town that afternoon through cold rain and standing water pooled along the highway shoulders. The county administration building looked gray and tired under storm clouds, while courthouse flags snapped hard in the wind. Inside, everything smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. We met privately with Martin Greeley for nearly 2 hours. No accusations. No emotional speeches. Just documents. Timelines. Permit records. Insurance exposure concerns. Martin stayed quiet most of the meeting, flipping pages slowly while rain streaked the courthouse windows behind him. Finally, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "You realize," he said carefully, "if lenders finance portions of Whitcomb Shores using projected roadway assumptions they did not legally control, this could become much larger than an HOA dispute." Daniel nodded once. "That is exactly what concerns us." Martin stared down at the file another long moment before speaking again. "Then you should know something else," he said quietly. Vanessa Whitcomb's primary mortgage lender requested emergency contact with the county assessor's office yesterday morning. Word spread through Whitcomb Shores before the weekend even started. Not official announcements. Worse, resident whispers, marina gossip, quiet conversations over burnt coffee at the diner near County Route 12 while rain streaked the windows and everybody pretended not to stare too long at whoever walked through the door. By Saturday morning, people were openly discussing lender exposure at breakfast tables across the subdivision. I knew because 3 different residents called Daniel asking whether the shoreline easement issue could affect future property values. Property values. That was the religion Vanessa built her authority on, and now fear was eating through it from the inside. Around noon, I drove into town for feed supplies and stopped at the Marina Diner on the way back. Cold wind rolled off Blackwater Lake hard enough to rattle the dock chains outside, while low fog sat heavy over the shoreline parking lot. The second I walked in, conversations dipped. Not hostile. Careful. The kind of silence that means everybody already knows more than they're saying out loud. Then something happened I had not seen in nearly a year. 2 Wickham Shores residents nodded at me first. Small gesture, but important. One of them, a retired contractor named Bill Hanley, even stood up from his booth and crossed the diner floor carrying his coffee mug. "Grant," he said quietly. A lot of us did not know what she was telling lenders. I studied him for a second before answering. Most people did not. Bill looked genuinely uncomfortable. "She told residents your ranch access dispute was already resolved." There it was again. Another lie unraveling publicly. Behind him, I noticed 3 more subdivision homeowners sitting near the front windows, suddenly avoiding eye contact with each other. Community shame has a very specific atmosphere in small American towns. Nobody wants to admit they ignored warning signs because things felt profitable at the time. Bill lowered his voice even further. "You should know the HOA emergency meeting Thursday night got ugly." That surprised me. Vanessa usually controlled those rooms like courtroom theater. "How ugly?" He let out a tired breath. People started asking why legal reserves tripled this year. Then somebody mentioned the shoreline easement map. Outside the diner windows, thunder rolled low across the lake, while rain hammered softly against parked pickup trucks. Bill stared into his coffee mug before continuing. "Vanessa told everyone the map was fake." I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because desperate people always reach for denial before collapse. Did they believe her? Bill glanced toward the counter where 2 Wickham Shores residents immediately looked away when they realized we noticed them listening. Not anymore. That hit differently than I expected. For months, I had felt isolated inside my own county, while Vanessa slowly poisoned public opinion around the ranch. Now the pressure had shifted direction, and she could feel it. You could almost sense the social gravity changing across the lake. That afternoon, Daniel called while I was parked near the old fishing dock, checking storm damage along the shoreline fence. Rainwater dripped from the brim of my hat, while muddy waves slapped against cedar pilings below me. "Grant," he said, "you need to sit down before I tell you this." My stomach tightened instantly. "What happened?" I heard papers shifting on his desk. Then a pause. Vanessa Whitcomb missed a secured loan payment 42 days ago. Cold wind rolled across the water hard enough to shake the dock chains beside me. Daniel's voice stayed calm. And yesterday afternoon, her lender transferred portions of the distressed debt package to a secondary acquisition firm. I stared out through the fog toward Whitcomb Shores glowing faintly across the lake. Meaning what exactly? Another pause. Meaning somebody is preparing to buy leverage over her assets. The emergency HOA meeting happened 3 nights later during the worst storm of the month. Rain slammed against the Whitcomb Shores clubhouse windows hard enough to blur the lake completely, while thunder rolled across Blackwater County in slow, heavy waves that rattled the light fixtures overhead. I parked beside a row of soaked pickup trucks and sat in silence for a moment, watching residents hurry through the rain toward the entrance carrying folders, umbrellas, and expressions that looked more nervous than angry now. That mattered. Fear changes communities faster than outrage ever does. Inside, the atmosphere felt nothing like the polished HOA meetings Vanessa used to run. No casual chatter. No wine table near the fireplace. Just low whispers and the smell of wet jackets, burnt coffee, and stress. People avoided eye contact with each other the same way witnesses do before court testimony starts. Vanessa stood near the front podium wearing a dark navy blazer and holding herself rigidly still, but the performance was slipping now. You could see it in the tiny details. Papers slightly uneven in her hands. Makeup rushed. Voice tighter than usual when she called the meeting to order. "There has been significant misinformation circulating regarding shoreline access matters," she began carefully. Nobody interrupted her. Somehow that was worse. Silence pressure had fully settled over the room. Residents were no longer reacting emotionally to her authority. They were evaluating it. That shift is fatal for people like Vanessa. Then a man near the back stood up without waiting to be recognized. Carl Benton, retired insurance adjuster. Quiet guy. Lived near the marina docks. Did you disclose the easement dispute before expanding the legal reserve fund? He asked flatly. Vanessa smiled immediately. Too quickly. The board has acted responsibly at every stage. That is not what I asked. More silence after that. Heavy enough you could hear rainwater running through the gutters outside. Vanessa glanced toward two board members seated beside her, but neither one moved to support her. Another resident raised her hand next. Linda Mercer. Did lenders know the ranch access rights were disputed before refinancing? Vanessa's composure cracked a little further. These questions are inappropriate for an open community forum. Wrong answer. You could feel the room turn against her in real time. The social isolation around her was almost physical now. People shifted away from her side of the room. One board member quietly gathered his papers like he already wanted distance from the situation. Then the clubhouse doors opened behind me. Cold wind and rain swept briefly through the room as 3 county officials stepped inside alongside Sheriff Dalton Reeves. Nobody announced them. They did not need to. The entire room froze instantly. Sheriff Reeves removed his hat slowly while water dripped onto the tile floor beneath him. Martin Greeley walked beside him carrying a thick legal binder under one arm. Vanessa went completely still at the podium. What is this? She asked quietly. Not angry anymore. Careful. Sheriff Reeves looked around the room before answering. County review of potential disclosure irregularities tied to subdivision access representations. Nobody breathed for about 3 seconds after that. Martin stepped forward and placed several documents onto the board table directly in front of Vanessa. Effective immediately, he said, all pending HOA enforcement actions related to Holloway Ranch are suspended pending investigation. One resident near the back actually let out a stunned laugh before covering his mouth. Vanessa looked down at the paperwork without touching it. Her hands were trembling now, just slightly, but enough for everyone to see. Then Sheriff Reeves calmly added the sentence that finally shattered the room completely. And Mrs. Whitcomb, he said, county investigators would also like clarification regarding multiple financial disclosures connected to your personal property holdings. The emergency HOA meeting happened 3 nights later during the worst storm of the month. Rain slammed against the Whitcomb Shores clubhouse windows hard enough to blur the lake completely, while thunder rolled across Blackwater County in slow, heavy waves that rattled the light fixtures overhead. I parked beside a row of soaked pickup trucks and sat in silence for a moment, watching residents hurry through the rain toward the entrance carrying folders, umbrellas, and expressions that looked more nervous than angry now. That mattered. Fear changes communities faster than outrage ever does. Inside, the atmosphere felt nothing like the polished HOA meetings Vanessa used to run. No casual chatter. No wine table near the fireplace. Just low whispers and the smell of wet jackets, burnt coffee, and stress. People avoided eye contact with each other the same way witnesses do before court testimony starts. Vanessa stood near the front podium wearing a dark navy blazer and holding herself rigidly still, but the performance was slipping now. You could see it in the tiny details. Papers slightly uneven in her hands. Makeup rushed. Voice tighter than usual when she called the meeting to order. There has been significant misinformation circulating regarding shoreline access matters, she began carefully. Nobody interrupted her. Somehow that was worse. Silence pressure had fully settled over the room. Residents were no longer reacting emotionally to her authority. They were evaluating it. That shift is fatal for people like Vanessa. Then a man near the back stood up without waiting to be recognized. Carl Benton, retired insurance adjuster. Quiet guy. Lived near the marina docks. Did you disclose the easement dispute before expanding the legal reserve fund? He asked flatly. Vanessa smiled immediately. Too quickly. The board has acted responsibly at every stage. That is not what I asked. More silence after that. Heavy enough you could hear rainwater running through the gutters outside. Vanessa glanced toward 2 board members seated beside her, but neither one moved to support her. Another resident raised her hand next. Linda Mercer. Did lenders know the ranch access rights were disputed before refinancing? Vanessa's composure cracked a little further. These questions are inappropriate for an open community forum. Wrong answer. You could feel the room turn against her in real time. The social isolation around her was almost physical now. People shifted away from her side of the room. One board member quietly gathered his papers like he already wanted distance from the situation. Then the clubhouse doors opened behind me. Cold wind and rain swept briefly through the room as 3 county officials stepped inside alongside Sheriff Dalton Reeves. Nobody announced them. They did not need to. The entire room froze instantly. Sheriff Reeves removed his hat slowly while water dripped onto the tile floor beneath him. Martin Greeley walked beside him carrying a thick legal binder under one arm. Vanessa went completely still at the podium. "What is this?" she asked quietly. Not angry anymore. "Careful." Sheriff Reeves looked around the room before answering. "County review of potential disclosure irregularities tied to subdivision access representations." Nobody breathed for about 3 seconds after that. Martin stepped forward and placed several documents onto the board table directly in front of Vanessa. "Effective immediately," he said, "all pending HOA enforcement actions related to Holloway Ranch are suspended pending investigation." One resident near the back actually let out a stunned laugh before covering his mouth. Vanessa looked down at the paperwork without touching it. Her hands were trembling now, just slightly, but enough for everyone to see. Then Sheriff Reeves calmly added the sentence that finally shattered the room completely. "And Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "county investigators would also like clarification regarding multiple financial disclosures connected to your personal property holdings."